So the Shurim are in memory of Oisheba, that's Alman and the Fris, as usual. And we haven't done a Zmirot from Shabbat for a while because of the Yom Tov season, picked all kinds of poems. 2 weeks ago, the last year, we did the Yom. And I'm sure for many of us, this was a refreshing experience because we go through the listening to the Yom and it's Chinese. It's Aramaic, which all of a sudden we discovered that it's actually broken into component parts and it has a very, very defined message. We did that to explore. So just getting back a little bit to some of the Zmirot, Shimru Shabtotai, right before was one of the Yitzhak Meir, famous teacher there in Israel. His version of Shimru Shabtotai, many was singing Shabbat morning, and we'll see how that actually connects to the morning meal of Shabbat.
To the morning meal and the various customs of what we say for Kiddush in the morning when we do say Kiddush. So let's just see, this is a grafting of both psukim and concepts in Agadat Chazal that are mentioned in the Gemara. So the author, his name is Shlomo, and that you can see from the acrostic of Shimru, the Shin, and Le'amel, the Lamed, Maharu, the Mem, Hine is Shlomo. And then the next stanza is Chazak. Now, Chet Zayin Kuf, many of the authors signed off Chazak or Chazak ve'ematz, as we saw in the Akdamot. That's pretty standard. And here, instead of writing another 3 stanzas of Chet, Zayin, and Kuf, he uses the word Chazak as the first word of the 5th stanza, and it becomes Shlomo Chazak. But who is this Shlomo? That's not so clear. Not so clear. It's been suggested that it might be Shlomo Ibn Gabirol, the famous Spanish poet. Why not? He's a famous poet, and his name is Shlomo. So those who deal with the authorship of Zmirot list it as Ibn Gabirol with a question mark, because we're not 100% sure. There's got to be more than just the acrostic to tell us that it's Shlomo. You're going to have to pinpoint it down to Spanish poetry of the Middle Ages. And again, we're not 100% sure. In the Wikipedia, that's, the source of all knowledge today.
No, excuse me. ChatGPT.
Yeah. Right. So there, the suggestion was made by Dr. Yaakov Rothschild. And Yaakov Rothschild is a little close to my heart because he was a member of Ol Nechama community shul that I had the honor of serving as its rabbi for 12 years. But I never met him. He had died already before I came. And the Beit Midrash of Ol Nechama building is in his memory. So we call it the Rothschild Beit Midrash. He is a person who worked with the Misrad HaChinuch and wrote many, many fine articles of Jewish nature. And one of them was a whole series of articles about Zmirot. And in his article of Zmirot, he makes a suggestion that this was the Shlomo Ibn Gabirol. But whoever it is, it's obviously a beautiful poem and has a lot of content to it. So let's see it inside. We're just going to look at the first. So the sources begin after the poem on the first page. Source number 1 from Parshat Kitisa. Ve'atem daber el bnei Yisrael lemor. Moshe Rabbeinu, Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu to speak to bnei Yisrael. Ach et Shabtotai tishmoru. You shall be careful and guard the Shabbat. Ki oti beni uvenechem. It's a sign between me, God speaking, me and my children. L'dorotechem, for generations to come. L'da'a, to know. Ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. Shabbat is one of those signs of the not just existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but his relationship with us. He relates to us also through Shabbat. And this pasuk is the prologue to the psukim that we're very well familiar with. V'sharmu v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, lasot et Shabbat dorotam b'rit olam, b'ni uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam. It's almost a restatement of this particular pasuk. V'ata daber b'nei Yisrael lemor ach et Shabtotai tishmoru. So the poet takes the phrase Shabtotai tishmoru, guard my Shabbat, and begins with Shimru Shabtotai. guard and keep we use the phrase shomer Shabbat, somebody who's guarding Shabbat. He's careful about Shabbat. Shimru Shabtotai, leman tinku usva'atem miziz birchotai. Many people erroneously read it miziv. Ziv means a shine. But what does miziz birchotai mean in a moment? El hamnuchav kibatem. And before we go further, we're going to look at sources 2 and 3 to see the psukim in context, and then we'll go back to the poem. So from Yeshayahu, Perek Samach Vav. Perek Samach Vav happens to be the last chapter of Yeshayahu. It's actually read for the Haftarah of Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. And that's because of the pasuk towards the very end of the chapter, Vaya midei chodesh b'chodsho, midei Shabbat b'Shabbato. You have in one breath Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh. You can't get a better choice for a Haftarah for Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. So it's Yeshayahu Perek Samach Vav. And there, source number 2, in Psukim Yud and Yud Aleph, Yeshayahu says, Simchu et Yerushalayim v'gilu ba kol oaveha. They're actually nigunim, they're songs around this particular pasuk. Simchu et Yerushalayim v'gilu ba. It's a prophecy for the end of days, for Yemot HaMashiach, for the rebuilding of Yerushalayim. Sisu od ita misos kol hametamlim aleha. You shall rejoice. And who shall rejoice? All those who have mourned the loss of Yerushalayim. And Chachamim tell us on this pasuk that only those who properly mourn the loss of Yerushalayim will be meritorious, and they will have the zchut of seeing the joy of its rebuilding. So that's pasuk number 1. Leman tinku usvatem mishod tanchumeha, leman timotzu v'hitanaktem miziz kvoda. So here we know that those who read it in the Zmirot, miziv is wrong. It's miziz kvoda. And let's try to translate. This sounds a little bit Chinese as well. What does it mean? Leman tinku usvatem. Hanaka means to nurse. A mother nursing the baby. Leman tinku usvatem. You will be nursed and you will be satisfied. There's going to be so much nourishment there at that day. Mishod, it's actually not, we read it mishod, but shad, from the breast of the consolation. It means that Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to console us with an effervescent amount of nourishment. Leman tarmotzu, you're going to suck v'tanaktem and derive the pleasure, miziz kvoda, from the nipple. This is the nipple of the kvoda. We would say it's kvuda. Kvuda means the baggage, that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is supplying. It's the supply. The supply of spiritual nourishment is going to be overabundant. It's going to be effervescent. It's just going to be overflowing. There'll be so much. So the poet uses this pasuk to talk about those who will observe the proper Shabbat, will merit that great day of Leman Tinku Usvatem Miziz Birkotai. So here the poet changes the word kvoda to my bracha, my blessing. Where is this going to happen? Look at source number 3. This is Moshe Rabbeinu speaking in Parshat Re'eh in Dvarim. Ki lo batem ad ata el hamnucha ve'lanachala asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach. Here, OUIsrael is being told that the journey from Mitzrayim until Eretz Yisrael, it doesn't just end in Eretz Yisrael. Ki lo batem ad ata el hamnucha ve'lanachala is a reference to Yerushalayim and Beit HaMikdash. And how long did that take? It took 440 years from the time that Yeshua crosses the Yarden, which is 480 years from Yetziat Mitzrayim. So how do we know that? That's a pasuk. In Sefer Melachim Aleph, of course it's a haftarah of Parshat Truma. That's how yeshiva boys might know this pasuk. Else they'd never know it from Tanakh. But there it says, Shmonim shana, varba meot shana, litzeit b'nei Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, 480 years from Mitzrayim, Shlomo Melech builds the first Beit HaMikdash. So that's a long time, which Moshe Rabbeinu is already informing Bnei Israel. We're now 40 years after the event of Yetziat Mitzrayim, but we're not there yet. The journey is far from over. Ki lovatem ad ata el hamnucha vel hanachala. You have not yet arrived at the final station of what Yetziat Mitzrayim was all about. The author of Dayenu for Seder night, he already brings us from Ilu Hotzianu Mitzrayim v'lo aseh b'shvatim. Dayenu doesn't mean it would have been enough. It means that each stage of Yetziat Mitzrayim was so important and so significant, we would have made a whole Seder just for each stage. And where does it take us to? It takes us to Binyan Beit HaBchira, Beit HaMikdash. If you remember the poll, it takes us all the way to the end, the last station. So El Hamnucha V'El Hanachala is the station of Beit HaMikdash. And that's what the poet says here, Shimru Shabtotai. You observe the Shabbat, Leman Tinku Usmatem Miziz Birkoti. You will then benefit from the nourishment of that which a Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to supply as his blessing. El Hamnucha Kibatem. You're going to arrive. You will arrive at the station Menucha V'Nachala. And he's going to go on to spell it out as the poem goes by. But in the meantime, we have the refrain. The refrain is going to go over and over and over all 5 stanzas. Ulevu alai banai v'idnu ma'adanai Shabbat Hashem Lashem. Shabbat Hayom Lashem. So Shabbat Hayom Lashem actually comes from source number 5, where it says, Vayom Moshe ichluhu hayom ki Shabbat Hayom Lashem. Hayom lo timtza'ehu basadeh. What this is a reference to the man. So we were given 2 portions on Friday. Don't go out to the field to pick it up on Shabbat because it's not going to be there, right? But enjoy what you picked up on Friday for Friday night and Shabbat. And of course, the phrase Lechem Mishnah comes from this idea of double portion of Friday, and that's why we have 2 challahs to remember the Lechem Mishnah, the man that fell. So Ki Shabbat Hayom Lashem is a direct reference to the man, and this is done because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's telling us in the first stanza that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to provide spiritual nourishment when you arrive at Eretz Yisrael. So he's going to tell us all about this first time that we enjoyed spiritual nourishment. It was man that fell in the midbar, in the desert, Shabbat Hayom Hashem. But what does it mean? Ulevu alai banai. What does that mean? For the word levu means borrow. What should you be borrowing? So look at source number 4. This is the Gemara in Masechet Beitzah, Daf Tedvav Omud Bet. It says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Shimon. Rabbi Eliezer, it's Elazar ben Shimon. It's Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's son Elazar, and it said in the name of the Amorah, Rabbi Yochanan. Amar lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Am Yisrael, Banai, my children, Levu alai. Even if you have to borrow money for Shabbat provisions, V'kitshu Kedushat Hayom, and you should sanctify the sanctity of the day with good meals. Your meals on Shabbat and your wine and other basar v'dagim v'chol matamim, as we saw in different poems. You should have choice meat and good wines and so on. V'ha'aminu bi v'ani poreya. God says, don't worry, I'm going to pay the bill. Don't worry if you have to borrow and cut into your credit rating so that you should have proper meals for Shabbat. Now, against this idea is another Ma'amar Chazal that says, Asay Shabbatcha chol va'al titzrech librio, which means make your Shabbat weekday and don't have to borrow from others, take from others. The idea there is that on Shabbat we're supposed to have 3 meals. Normally during the weekday, in the days of Chazal, people ate 2 meals. So the add-on was Sudash Lishit, where normally in those days people didn't eat a 3rd meal. So the idea was, you shouldn't get used to, borrowing from people. So if all you have is food for 2 meals, let it be 2 meals. Make believe it's like weekday and you only have 2 meals and so on. But it's not a direct contradiction, because even the meals that we would have, even after you borrow money. So make sure you have your provisions for your Shabbat meal, and you don't be concerned, how am I going to repay the loans? Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to deal with it. And if you do this l'shem shamayim, for Kedushat Shabbat, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to see to it that you're going to be replenished and you'll have enough for the Shabbos meals. Ulevu alai banai ve'idnu ma'adanai. So ma'adanim are delicacies. We use it today in the stores that sell Shabbos provisions, right? Ma'adanai this and ma'adanai that. So ma'adan, today you use ma'adan for desserts, for puddings. We'll call it ma'adanim, ma'adaneh, and so on. So idnu ma'adaneh, yes, have extras. Don't just have basics on the table. But for your Shabbos meal, you got to have a nice dessert that, that if you're watching your sugar, you're not going to touch, right? You have to have special meal ideas on the menu for Shabbat. And if it costs a little bit extra, cut into it, borrow the money. Ulevu alai banai v'idnu banai. And this is a direct takeoff of the Gemara in Masechet Beitzah. Banai, my children, levu alai v'kitshu kedushat hayom v'haminu, and believe me, haminu bi, believe in me, have confidence in me. V'ani poreh, God saying, I'll pay it up, don't worry.
According to tradition, he lived in a cave for a few years and had nothing.
They had nothing, right. Both of them were in the cave for 12 years, right? For 12 months, and then another 12 months, right? So the Beseda, that was that they had the charuv. There was a charuv tree. Carob. Yeah, okay, Beseda. Right. So first of all, there's no contradiction there either. So that's what they had. That was a.
So maybe he was principally aware of how important it was.
Yefeh mod, yefeh. So it's very possible that Dafka, from the experience of having nothing in suffering those days, while being in seclusion, so he's talking about what Shabbat should really be, and we should get a take on it. And even if you have to borrow, you should have. So let's continue the poem. La'amel kir'u dror, for work. Work is 6 days of work. Announce freedom. Now we did this phrase in Dror Yikra, Levein Imbat. We talked about that the dror was a takeoff. It was a bird. That was a dror. Liberty, right, Liberty Park. La'amel kir'u dror, v'natati et birchati, and I will give my blessing. And here comes a very, very strange usage of a pasuk from Parshat Emor. If you look at source number 6, let's do the pasuk first, and then we'll get back to its usage. Isha elachuta lo tikach litzror legalot ervata aleha bechayeha. This is the prohibition in Parshat Achrimot, not Parshat Emor. Parshat Achrimot, the Parsha of Gilui Arayot, of adultery, of relationships that are completely forbidden and off limits. So a person is now allowed to marry a woman and his sister, be married to her sister at the same time. Lo tikach litzror. Litzror means to bind together. To bind together, which what you're doing is, you figure that, boy, this is a good idea, because then I only have to get used to one mother-in-law. Yafeh. So Yaakov married 2 sisters. So the one who talks about this on these psukim is the Ramban. The Ramban makes this famous comment that when Chazal say that the Avot, our forefathers, observed mitzvot, and this is all pre-Matan Torah, they only kept the mitzvot in Eretz Yisrael and not in Chutz La'aretz. And one of his proofs is that Yaakov was married to 2 sisters. And that only happens in Chutz La'aretz. And Ramban says that's why when Yaakov returns to Eretz Canaan, one of the sisters has to go. And as it was Rachel who dies. But he would not be able to enter into Eretz Yisrael being married to 2 sisters. And that opens up the whole Pandora's box, where is Kevrei Rachel? Because Beit Lechem is far from the border of Chutz La'aretz. Far from the border. And there, the Torah teaches us that Yaakov buries Rachel baderech, on the way somewhere. So we know that there could be different places that are called Beit Lechem, by the way. Beit Lechem doesn't have to be just one place. In Megillat Ruth, we speak about Beit Lechem Yehuda. And why is it mentioned Beit Lechem Yehuda? Because obviously there's another Beit Lechem in the north. There is another Beit Lechem in the north. And the question is, maybe Rachel dies before the Golan Heights, coming back from Aram Naharaim, and he schleps the body a little bit and buries her, but nowhere near the Beit Lechem of today. And then there are other possibilities that the Kever Rachel is north of Yerushalayim in Eretz Binyamin. For those who are familiar with the road that goes out to Adam and Psagot, there is a place that Rav Yoel Ben Nun and others have been convinced that that might be the real Kever Rachel. But the Kever Rachel might actually be in we call the Ramat HaGolan. Why is it called Ramah? Because it's the flat mountains. It's not bumpy mountains. We see if you drive on the highway number 60 and you're driving north towards Tveria, so just keep your eye to the right, but keep your eye on the road actually. But if you turn to the right, you will see like top mountains, but it's pretty flat on top, and that's called a Ramah, and it's called Ramat HaGolan. And if you remember the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Perek Lamed Aleph, again another Haftarah, second day Rosh Hashanah, Kol beraman nishma, nehi b'chi tamrurim, Rachel mevaka al baneha, the whole medrash that Am Yisrael is going out to Galut Bavel, and that was the path. The path was the northeastern path of Syria, how we went to Bavel. So there, all the Avot are crying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu only listens to Rachel. Where? On the Ramah. Kol b'Ramah nishma.
Alive or dead?
What do you mean she was over there? On the Ramah. So you're asking in terms of Yaakov Avinu, where exactly does she die?
No, I'm asking because so much money has been spent in Kever Rachel where it is. And if he's not there.
Right. So I'm not there to. Right. So one of my great teachers, Rav Mital Zichron Lebracha from Lunchfoot, once said that after all the tefillot and everything that was poured into the Kever Rachel in Beit Lechem, so Rachel's there. Let's Shimru. That's it. But this is an open-ended question. I'm not here to solve the issue of where Rachel is buried. I'm just pointing out, I want to confuse the issue that she might be buried north of Yerushalayim. She might be buried even in the area of the Golan. And there are all kinds of indications. But the Ramban points out that Yaakov Avinu and all the Avot, the concept of the Avot observing mitzvot prior to the giving of the Torah was only relevant in Eretz Yisrael and not in Chutz La'aretz. So that's Ramban's big point, that even for us, Eretz Yisrael is the place that we ought to fulfill mitzvot, and in Chutz La'aretz, the fulfillment of mitzvot is we used to call it a CIT, counseling and training. We are practice. It's like a child at 10 years old, you tell them to say Birkat HaMazon. That they should know when you get into Eretz Yisrael, you should know, you don't start from ABC, you should know what to do. You should know how to be a practicing Jew. So it's all in training only in Chutz La'aretz. Now, not everybody bought into the Ramban's idea, but he said it. And the Ramban was pretty heavy duty from all the great Rishonim. So he said it, and he was Yafeh Doresh, Yafeh Mekayem. He left Chutz La'aretz, Spain, and he makes it Eretz Yisrael. But it's a phenomenal idea. So he does touch on this with Yaakov Avinu, and he says in Chutz La'aretz he was married to two sisters. So V'isha alachota lo tikach litzror legalot ervata aleha b'chayeha. When the two sisters are alive, to be married to both. But if one sister dies, then it's permissible to marry the other sister. You don't have to, but you can do it. I happen to know some people who are married to their former sister-in-law. When the wife died, they married the sister. It's halachically permissible, because that's what the Torah says, Aleha b'chayeha.
Like,
Don't they do Yibum?
No, Yibum is something else. Yibum is a little bit something else, right? But it's, but Yibum, there's a mitzvah for the brother to marry the surviving wife of a brother-in-law of a brother who died. But here it's an option.
If they want to.
If they want to. Allah b'chaya, it's an option, that's all. So this pasuk has only to do with Gilui Arayot. And yet the Paitan here is going to use it in a twist. He's going to use the same phrase, but a completely positive twist to it. Before we see that, look in source 7 rather, and that is the materials that were used for the Mishkan. Bet HaMishkan taseh 10 yeriot, sheish mazar, there was linen, and there was tchelet, and argaman, and tulat shani, these beautiful colors of blue and purple and red that were interwoven together. If you've seen pictures from Machon Mikdash in the Old City, they have a whole book at this, but they also have an exhibition in the Old City. You can see the Mishkan, what it looked like, and so on. So it was multicolored and multifaceted. So let's go back to the poem now and see what he's saying here. And the second stanza, Le'amel kirudrar, for work you should announce freedom. V'natati et birchati, and I will give you my blessings. Isha elachuta litzror ligalot al yom simchati. I'm saying that each woman should be bound with the next one draped in beautiful garments for the day of Simcha, for Shabbat. Here, the day Yom Simchatai means Shabbat. What kind of clothing? Bigdei sheish im shani, the same material and coloring that was used for the Mishkan. The women should be personifying the colors of the Mishkan. V'hitbonenu mizkanai, and you should pay careful attention to what our elders have taught. What have our elders taught? Look at source number 8. Our elders have taught v'chibadato me'asot d'rachecha. V'chibadato, the pasuk in Yeshayahu that talks about Kavod Shabbat and Oneg Shabbat. So what exactly is Kavod Shabbat? Kavod Shabbat is everything we do before Shabbat in preparation for Shabbat. And one of the things is to prepare nice clothing, not to wear weekday clothing. V'chibadato me'asot d'rachecha, v'chibadato shelo yeh malbushcha shel Shabbat kemalbushcha shel chol. Your Shabbos clothing should not be your weekday clothing. When I lived in Beersheba, so I remember I was rabbi in the OUisrael in Beersheba in the 80s. So they used to tell me, if there was a bar mitzvah of a non-religious family, how can you tell who's the bar mitzvah boy? He's the kid with the new sneakers. Right. Today, they say in some circles, how can you tell if somebody's dressed for Shabbos or not? He ties his hair. He ties his hair. Otherwise, there's no difference. He's dressed the same way, right? It doesn't mean a sister. Correct. Doesn't mean a sister. It means all of the women together should be draped with great, beautiful clothing, and the tapestry should look like the Mishkan. Should look like the Mishkan, because the home is the Beit HaMikdash, and I think the focus here on the women is because the women create the sanctity of Shabbat at home. And you know, this is not just a homiletic idea. The Rav spoke about this often, that he says, Shabbat, I learned from my parents. From my father, I learned what to do and what not to do. But from my mother, I learned how to experience Shabbat. Says the experience of Shabbat I got from the mother. And he says that's what it means, al titosh Torat imecha. That, it says, I didn't learn from my mother, that this is osur, the mutter, that I got from my father. But for my mother, this experience of Shabbat. And that's something that's highly spiritual. And it's amazing that from a thoroughbred Litvak, you'd hear something like that. Because that sounds bordering on Chassidut. But the Rav always talked about the fact that he felt that his neshama was a hybrid, and he had some chassidus in it. Even he wrote it in a letter, writing an acknowledgement, a haskama, to a Rav Rivlin in New York, who wrote a beautiful Rivkin Rifkin, who wrote a beautiful sefer, and he was a Lubavitcher Chassid. And the Rav had an affinity to Chabad. We know that from 1926 already. He studied in Berlin together with his buddy Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and they were together. So he actually writes in this letter, Nima shel Chasidut genuza bi. There's a touch of Chasidut buried in me. And the truth is, it was even more than a touch. It was more than a touch. There was something there. And you didn't find that amongst all the other, Misnagdim, Litvaks. It wasn't there. But the Rav was very, very unique in this respect. Shema? Right. So Ashkava the Rabbi, that he wrote, that was a speech he gave in 1940, when the sixth Rebbe invited him to be the main speaker of the dinner that launched the Lubavitch institutions in America. And Lubavitch Chassidim read it carefully, because the Rebbe wanted it to go public, and he wanted that they should all understand it. That's correct. And so the Rav has, but I'm talking about a different letter that was read. Rav Shechter in one of his books, Nine Harav, publicized it as well. And I actually once upon a time had a copy of it with the stationery, but I may have lent it out, and I don't know if I got it back. But nevertheless, I know the letter. It's a very, very important letter. So here, the idea of dressing properly and beautifully for Shabbat. Even Rav Moshe Feinstein was once asked, do you have to have special Shabbos shoes? Now that question was never asked by a woman. She's got her 15 pairs of shoes anyway, right? So she could pick one for Shabbat. But it was asked by a man, I have one pair of shoes. And Rav Moshe says, you must shine your shoes on Friday if you have one pair of shoes, just to show that it's Shabbos. I mean, can you imagine to go so far and talk about big day Shabbat? There should be big day Shabbat, right? Okay, so if you look at the Kenai means our Chachamim, and the idea of source number 8 from the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat is an instruction shelo yeh malbushcha shel Shabbat ki malbushcha shel Choel, and that's why the poet alludes to this by saying that each of the women should be draped nicely and beautifully, bigdei sheish shoni, and in accordance with the teachings of our Chachamim. That's how I would loosely translate it. Bononui mizkainai. To check out what Chazal, our Chachamim, said about how you should be dressed properly. Shabbat hayom lashem. This repeats itself. Ulevu alai banai vidnu madanai Shabbat hayom lashem. Next paragraph. Ma'aru et hamaneh lasot et dvar Esther. All right, Purim wasn't so long ago, right? Just a few months ago. What's the pasuk that he's lifting out of context? Ma'aru et Haman lasot et dvar Esther. Very good. But here, Haman's not here. Haman's not here. In the context, Achashverosh tells the servants, Ma'aru, get him moving, get Haman moving. Ma'aru et Haman, lasot et dvar Esther. Esther said she's making a party and inviting two guests, Achashverosh and Haman. And she says, get him, move on him. Ma'aru et Haman, lasot et dvar Esther. Here there's a play on the word Haman. It's Hamaneh. What is Hamaneh? The word maneh, if you would just see it in rabbinic Hebrew, not in Tanakhic Hebrew, when we say, let's say, where is it found? There's a Gemara in Masechet Psachim, Daf Chet. It says that if a person davens for, he says, for the welfare of a child who might be sick. So there's a whole issue if you're allowed to use tzedakah as a type of bargaining chip against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So in general, you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to tell the Kadosh Baruch Hu, I'll be more careful with even with Lashon Hara. I'll be careful with kashrus. I'll keep with Shabbat. I'll make a deal. Strike a deal with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. I need God badly, and you tell the Kadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to be better and this and that. Can't do that. That's called shochad. Says Asher lo yikach shochad. It says in Parshat Ekev, and Ramban says it's shochad shel mitzvah. You can't bribe a Kadosh Baruch Hu with a mitzvah. But if a person says, Hare alai, I am taking upon myself maneh, to give a certain amount of money. Maneh is a coin. Sela is a coin in Chazal. Al menat sheyichyeh b'ni. So my son should survive. So Gemara says, Harezu tzadik gamur. That's perfectly okay. So Chazal teach us that with tzedakah, you're allowed to use as a chip. And that's why at Mishaberach v'choleh, we make a donation. It's not a cheap shot of fundraising by the shul, by the gabbai, but it's part of tefillah for tzedakah. That's why Shlomo Melech said in Mishlei, right, tzedakah tatzil mimavet. You're allowed to use tzedakah as part of what you're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu if it has to do with health, in health-related issues. So Sela and Maneh, they go together. So Maneh is a coin. And here the poet is using this. He's playing on the word Haman, but he's using it in a different way. Hamaneh, which means the coin. Maru, bring out the coins. Bring out the money. He's still playing on the fact that, maybe I don't have enough money to put together a nice Shabbat spread. La Sot et Devar Esther. There's a concept called Sudat Shlomo. We say that on Tisha B'Av for Sudat Shlishit, even if Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbat, you're allowed to have a full-blown Sudat Shlishit like Sudat Shlomo. Like Shlomo Melech, means a royal meal. So Chazal here also said Dvar Esther is a type of royal meal. You're supposed to put out a royal meal for Shabbat. Bring out the cash. Ma'ru et hamaneh lasot et Dvar Esther. But I think it's also a play on the word Haman, the man. Because it's Hey Mem Nun is also Haman. And here the poet takes this pasuk out of context from Gillat Esther, where it says Ma'ru et Haman, but there it means Haman, Haman, banging, but it's Haman. Like I remember sometimes people have looked in after Aleinu L'Shabeach, you have all kinds of add-ons. You have the Sheish Zchirot, and you have Shlosh Esrei Ikarim of the Rambam, and then you have Parshat Haman? What's Haman doing there? It's not Parshat Haman, it's Parshat Haman. You want to talk to Kadosh Baruch Hu and remind yourself basically that God is the provider. So after you finish davening, you take note. Hopefully you didn't daven to the wall, but you daven to Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Maru et Hamaneh lasot et Dvar Esther v'chishvu im hakoneh l'shalem achol v'hoter. Who is the koneh? Who is the owner of the world? Koneh Shemayim v'aretz. Kadosh Baruch Hu is Koneh Shemayim v'aretz. Let him make the cheshbon. In our term at the makolet, you have a cheshbon at the makolet. You let him make the cheshbon, the calculation. Who? Let God. He's paying up. Kadosh Baruch Hu said, "Uluvu alai banai v'idnu madanai." Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to pay as Chazal taught us, and he's going to pay for the meal and the extras. Right? For here you have a great proof that after Shabbos you have to have leftover. Right? Because that's what you're going to eat on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and sometimes, if you're lucky, Wednesday, right? Left it. Thursday is already eating the chulent for Shabbos, You're eating next week's leftover beforehand, right?
Called defensive eating.
Defensive eating? Achol v'hoter. So where does that come from? So flip the page, look at the other side, and you see, source 9 is the pasuk from Esther. Vayomer HaMelech maharu et Esther, et Haman lasot et Dvar Esther. Right? It was Achashverosh who said this phrase. And in source number 10, when is a Kadosh Baruch Hu knighted, K-N-I-G-H-T, knighted as the Koneh Shemayim v'aretz? Vayvarcheu vayomar Baruch Avram le'el elyon Koneh Shemayim v'aretz. Who said this? Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem, right? Uvaruch el elyon Hashem migein tzarecha biyadecha vayiten lo maser mikol vayomer Melech Sdom el Avram ten li hanefesh v'archush lach vayomer Avram el Melech Sdom harimoti yadi el Hashem el elyon Koneh Shemayim v'aretz. Avram Avinu is using it also. Koneh Shemayim v'aretz. When do we use the phrase? I'm going to digress for a second. When do we use the phrase in our tefillot? Kadosh Baruch Hu is Koneh Shemayim v'aretz. Friday night. In what context? Kiddush?
Davening as well.
Wearing that. It's not in Kiddush. In Kiddush you say Konei Shamayim Va'aretz. Right. After Shmon Esrei of Ma'ariv, we have what's called Tfilah Achat Me'ein Sheva. It's abbreviated. It's not a Chazarat HaShatz. It's not an official bona fide Chazarat HaShatz, but it's an abbreviated version of the Chazarat HaShatz, where we say Vayachulu, and then the Shliach Tzibur says, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu, Elokei Avoteinu, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, Elokei L'Gadol, L'Gibor V'Norah, El Elyon, Konei Shemayim Va'aretz, and then Magen Avot, B'Dvaro, Mechayim Eitim, and then Elokeinu, Elokeiנו, Ritzim Nuchatenu, until Mekadesh HaShabbat. But it's not a bona fide Shmon Esrei at all, so much so that Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, the late chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, so in his Shelot Tshuvot, he says that the Chazan doesn't have to have his feet together, nor does he have to do the ritual bowings by Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Avoteinu. Some Chazanim do that because they don't know. This is not a Shmon Esrei. It's just a whatever. It's an institution, it has a history to it, and sometimes in certain circumstances we actually delete it. But what's interesting, and it was never part of the Shmon Esrei, but it begins almost like the beginning of the bracha of Avot. Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Elokei Avoteinu, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, Elokei L'Gadol, L'Gibor V'Norah, El Elyon. But in our Shmon Esrei, it's Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Hakol. Where is the Konei Shemayim Va'aretz? Where is in our Shmon Esrei? The answer was that originally our Shmon Esrei had Konei Shamayim Va'aretz, but it was censored out and changed to Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Hakol, because of a medrash that says that Konei Shamayim Va'aretz, that Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem Hotzi Lechem V'Yayin, and he was the one who said Konei Shamayim Va'aretz. His understanding was that Avraham Avinu was partner to God in creating the world. And this was very, very problematic against Christian theology that Kadosh Baruch Hu has some partners there. And therefore, in order to protect the theology that the Kadosh Baruch Hu had no partners, we opted to delete it from the nusach of the pasuk, Konei Shemayim Va'aretz, and we said Konei Hakol. Kadosh Baruch Hu, he was the one, but it introduced even an hefsek, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, he's the owner of everything, and so on. And we were very, very, very careful about this. Also, with regard to Konei Hakol, where we say, Kulam Awim, Kulam...
Isn't that a Kiddush?
Yeah, no. In Birkat Yotzei Amarot, and it's also found in the bracha of Kiddush Levana, where we say Konam. We say it also in the Kel Adon HaKol HaMaasim, Ritzon Konam. Right? The original word was Koneihem. The original words was Koneihem, but not in the plural. It was Koneihem without a yud. It was a singular konei of them being all of the created features. And that too was censored out because it sounded like Kadosh Baruch Hu had multiple creators, and therefore was Ratzon Konam, and that was it. And it was and this was done to protect that the church should not think for a moment that we are acknowledging that a Kadosh Baruch Hu has some partners there, which is something that they believe in. That Kadosh Baruch Hu and Yeshu and so on, we censored it out. So that's why Ratzon Konam in our Konei Hakol in our Shmon Esrei really was what once was Konei Shemayim Va'aretz. But there's another place where we actually have it in its original, and it's not an accident. If you go back to Nishmat Kol Chai, Mi et malach umi yishpalach umi yarachlach hakel hagadol hagibor v'anora el elyon konei shemayim va'aretz. It's there in its original. It's original. And then hakel betza'atzumot uzecha hagadol b'chvod shemecha hagibor lenetzach v'anora b'norotecha hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa. This is all an intro to Shmon Esrei. Hakel Hakel b'tatzumot uzecha hagadol b'chvod shemecha hagibor lanetzach v'hanora b'norotecha hamelech hayoshev al kisei. So you have all this in the bracha of Avot. All of these words, Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Hanora, Kel Elyon, Hamelech Ozer, Mashiach Magen, it's all there. It's all there. And it's going to be a shir in itself. Maybe one day we'll actually do this for me to show that the author of the Nishmat Kol Chai may have been the first pope of the Catholic Church.
Oh my God. Oh, wow.
But I'm going to keep you in dire suspense. Of course he was Jewish. He wasn't Shmad. He wasn't Shmad. This is the story of the fast of the 9th of Tevet. And it was in the tremendous challenge that we had against early Christianity. Because the first generations of Christianity were all Jewish. And not just Jewish, they weren't Reformed Jews. They were very, very devout religious Jews, to the extent they were even super Jews, and they were Mashiachistim. They were, with Mashiach, and they saw in Yeshu a type of Mashiach figure. And we tried to battle them intellectually, and it didn't work. So we did two things. We added a bracha in Shmon Esrei. Right, added a bracha to tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we can't do anything. Why don't you cause them heart attacks? We're asking Kadosh Baruch Hu that the early Christians should drop dead. Can you imagine such a tefillah? That was the tefillah. But what was the original version of the tefillah? That went through all kinds of language change too. The original version was La Mishumadim al Tihi Tikva. What's a Mishumad? Those who went over to Christianity. And then later it became Minim, and then it became Malshinim. It became all kinds of changes to somehow doctor up the language there. But the Mishumid were the Christians, the early Christians. So that was the first thing we tried to do. But then on a more practical, we took somebody whose name was Shimon, and we urged him to go over to the other side and derail the Christian theology and make it so clear that they've moved away from Judaism. And he succeeded. And he moves up in the hierarchy of the church, and eventually actually becomes the first pope. And he dies on the 9th of Tevet. And in Eretz Yisrael, they decide to honor his memory because he sacrificed his neshama for Am Yisrael. And he derails Christianity from Am Yisrael. It's claimed, you can see this in Encyclopedia too, while there are other suggestions who wrote the Nishmat Kol Chai, but it is suggested that he actually is the author of Nishmat Kol Chai, and we kept it in the Siddur. And he has the original version of what the Shmon Esrei first bracha was, Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, Hanora, El Elyon, Konei, Shemayim, Va'aretz.
Changes. Why did I think?
Not Borei.
Right. So here, the idea of Konei Shemayim Va'aretz is, if we're going to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for our desires, for whatever we need, so you have to spell it out that there's an address. Kadosh Baruch Hu is the balabot, is the owner of everything. That's why it's there. Even in its updated version, Konei HaKol, it's still there. Yeah.
Is he considered that he died al Kiddush Hashem because he derailed?
Look, it's a hidden piece of Jewish history, and that's why in Shulchan Aruch, so most strangest phrase appears there, but Rabbi Yosef Karo wasn't the author of it. It comes from an addendum to a book called Megillat Ta'anit, and it says that on the 9th of Tevet, Lo noda ezet tzara erubo. We fast on the 9th of Tevet, we don't know what happened. Now, Am Yisrael has a very good memory. The collective memory of Am Yisrael is impeccable. What does it mean to have a fast day in the calendar? We don't fast. Nobody fasts the 9th of Tevet. We fast the 10th of Tevet, but not the 9th of Tevet. It says that there's a fast on the 9th of Tevet. We forgot what happened. We conveniently forgot what happened. It has all the trimmings of censorship, all the trimmings, that we'd rather not talk about it because you don't want to talk about it. But anyway, getting back to the poem, so the idea of Konei Shemayim Va'aretz is mentioned as being the name. It's reference to Kadosh Baruch Hu. He is the one who owns everything. And therefore, That Achol Voter, I'll quickly just mention in source 11 from Divrei Yamim, talks about a Kadosh Baruch Hu in the context of the days of Beit HaMikdash. Me'atel hatruma lebeit bayit Hashem, achol v'saveya v'hoter. This phrase comes from that pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. And let's look at now the bitchu bi emunai. Emunai means, it refers to Am Yisrael. Ushtu yein mashmanai, should be drinking with special good wines and so on. Shabbat hayom Lashem, ulevu alai banai v'ednu matanai, Shabbat hayom Lashem. And now comes the connection to Geulat Am Yisrael, because Shabbat leads to Geulah, and hence these psukim from Yeshayahu are so relevant. Hine Yom Geulah, Yom Shabbat, im tishmoru, if you're going to keep it. Flip the page again to the source number 12. Amar Rab Yochanan, Amar Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, Imolei mishamrim Yisrael shtei Shabbatot kilchatan. If we could only keep 2 Shabbatot in a row properly, miyad nigalim, the Geulah will come immediately, and it tries to prove it from some psukim. And the reason why it's 2 Shabbatot, because already the second Shabbat after Har Sinai is the parsha of the Mekoshesh Eitzim b'Yom HaShabbat. We couldn't keep 2 Shabbatot in a row. And once the Mekoshesh Eitzim violated Shabbat, the week after, there was already Chilul Shabbat. That's a machloket. One opinion is it was Tzalofchad, and there are different opinions in the Gemara who the Mekoshesh was, but whatever it was, they say that he did it l'shem shamayim, and he wanted to be a guinea pig to show Am Yisrael, look what happens if you violate Shabbat, they're going to execute you, don't violate Shabbat. But it was a boomerang. It caused the exact opposite effect, and he basically plowed the road for Chilul Shabbat. So for all Chilul Shabbat, subsequent Chilul Shabbat. So Hine Yom Geulah, Yom Shabbat, im tishmoru, v'item li sgula, Linu va'achar ta'avoru. V'item li segula, we just read on Shavuot 2 days ago from Parshat Yitro. We are the chosen people. You will be the chosen people. Linu, who said Linu? There's only one time in the Chumash that the word Linu is found. Linu po halayla v'ashivoti. It was said by Bilam. The Torah says that Bilam tells the Melech Moab, Balak, says, Lino Palayla, sleep over one night, and maybe God's going to appear to me, and I'll have an idea of what to tell you, if I should curse them or not curse them, and so on. What's Achar Ta'avoru? Where does that come from? It comes from Parshas Vayera, when the Malachim came to the home of Avraham Avinu, and he says, Achar Ta'avoru, that don't leave me. First I have to give you what to eat. And then you'll be able to move on. So here the poet takes both things and grafts it. Linu, you will be able to sleep through the night of Galut. Galut is the harshness of the Galut. But you're going to make it through the night. Bachar Tavoru. You're going to survive the night of the Galut. Ve'az tiyu lefanai v'timal'u tzvunai. You're going to be able to live before me. Lifanai here means Eretz Yisrael. You're going to make it to Eretz Yisrael where it's Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereshit Hashana Ad Acharit Shana. You'll make it back to Eretz Yisrael and will be fulfilled with all the hidden things that were waiting for you. And those hidden things are referenced to in source number 14 in Tehillim. Ma rav tufcha asher tzafanta lirecha pa'alta lechosecha bach neged bnei adam. That there are hidden things that David HaMelech said are promised for Am Yisrael in the end of days, and the poet taps into that idea. Timal'u tzvonai Shabbat hayom Lashem, and then get to the last paragraph, the last stanza. Chazek kiryati. Kiryah, whenever it's anonymous kiryah, it means Yerushalayim. Kiryah, and in Aramaic it's karta. That's why the parking lot down by the old city is called karta, right? It's the city. It's the city parking lot, karta, and that's why niture karta. the building company is Karta. They're building Yerushalayim. And the Turei Karta, which means guarding the city, Shomrei Hachomot Yerushalayim. That's what the Turei Karta. They believe, Turei Karta believes we're the guardians of the city. Right. Okay, Beseda. I'm not saying they are, but I'm just explaining that phrase comes from the Yerushalmi, by the way. Turei Karta. So Kiryah, Chazek Kiryati El Elokim Elyon. Kadosh Baruch Hu should rebuild, basically, rehabilitate the city of God, Yerushalayim. Vashevel Nivati. What is the Naveh? Not just my grandson Naveh, but what is it? Beit HaMikdash. It's one of the nicknames of Beit HaMikdash. If you look at the Hoshana of Even Shtiyah, Beit HaBchira, Naveh is Beit HaMikdash, B'simcha u'behigayon. So today in modern Hebrew we say higayon means logic, but it's not just logic, it's also something more emotional than logic. Yishoreru sham rinanai. Who is going to be singing my songs there in the Beit HaMikdash? Leviai v'Kohanai. What should be first? Kohanim or Leviim?
Kohanim.
Should be Kohanim, except Kohanim are also Leviim, right? But who has the job of the singing?
Leviim.
The Leviim, except that they Kohanim who are talented enough also joined. So the Kohanim had other jobs in Beit HaMikdash. The Leviim had the job of Shirat HaLeviim, but a Kohen is also a Levi, so he could join the choir or the instrument and so on. That was perfectly okay. When we give Kohen and Levi aliyot before Yiva Yisrael, so why do we give the Levi? Not because there's anything sacred about the Levi. It's because the Kohen is also a Levi. But instead of giving Mr. Cohen to Aliyah, so we give Mr. Levine, an Aliyah as well. But the proof is, if Mr. Levine is not there and there's no Mr. Levy and Levenstein and Lewinsky and all the other, and Segals and all the other Levium names, so you just give the same Kohen to Elias, because the Levi is actually the second Aliyah. And that's why the Rav once said that if there's no Kohen at all, so he said you should give a Yisrael the first Aliyah and not a Levi. While you can give a Levi, but he said you'd rather not, because people erroneously might think that the reason you're giving the Levi because you got something special there. That's not the reason we give Levi. We give the Levi the second Aliyah because the Kohen is also a Levi. So it's actually because of Kedushat Kahuna. So if there's no Kohen in Shul, you just give a Yisrael. Yeah, Makshel. Yeah. No. We can give it to a Levi, but the Rav preferred that you don't give it to a Levi. So the Rav, Zichron Levracha, those who knew him, knew he was a Levi, Beit HaLevi, but, and the name, I learned this from Avshalom Kor, Mori Rabbi Belashon, the great linguist here in Israel, he's still alive, yeah, that Soloveitchik is a nightingale. Right, and in the Tunisian community, nightingale, family name became Twito, because the bird goes tweet, 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 and the Hebraicized Twito was Zamir. Not just that, but we had a president of the Supreme Court, Professor Zamir. He was born Soloveitchik. Soloveitchik is a Zamir, is a nightingale, a bird that sings, a sing bird. But the Rav readily admitted, and we knew it also, he was not musically inclined. So he felt that he would not be in the choir in the third Beit HaMikdash. So there was another job, that's to be the doorman, the honor guard, but he felt it was zakein v'lo lefi chvodo. It wouldn't be appropriate for him to be on the honor guard. So what would he do in Beit HaMikdash? In a long story, he discovered that he'd be the private tutor for the Kohen Gadol for Yom Kippur activity. So he felt that would be an appropriate job for him in the third Beit HaMikdash. But he didn't think he was going to be a doorman. So Kohanim v'Leviyai v'Kohanai ve'az tit'aneg al Hashem Shabbat hayom Hashem. That's the pasuk from Yeshayahu. Ad tit'aneg al Hashem v'irkafti al bamatecha. In certain Sephardi families and Nusa and Chassidim, this pasuk is read right before Kiddush, as before you say Al Ken Berach Hashem et Yom HaShamat V'Akacheu, and that's why this poem got thrown in as a Shabbos morning part of the Zmirot, and not the Friday night Zmirot. Okay, we did justice with this poem Shabbat Hayom Hashem.